February 26, 2022, 11:30 p.m. Brussels. 7 men in a conference room, one decision. By midnight, Russia's entire banking system was cut off from the global financial network. Not bombed, not invaded, disconnected. Overnight, Russian banks could no longer send or receive international payments. Trillions of dollars in trade, frozen. The world's 11th largest economy, severed from the financial system that makes modern civilization function. With one decision, made by people you have never heard of, in a building you cannot find on a map, a nuclear-armed nation was financially erased. In Beijing, Xi Jinping watched. In Riyadh, the Saudi crown prince watched. In New Delhi, in Brasília, in Pretoria, every leader of every major nation that had ever disagreed with Washington watched. And they all thought the same thing. That could be us. Most people have never heard of SWIFT. That is by design. SWIFT stands for Society for Worldwide Interbank Financial Telecommunication. It is not a bank. It does not hold money. It does not process payments. It sends messages. Specifically, it sends the messages that tell banks around the world what to do with money. When a German car manufacturer pays a Japanese steel supplier, SWIFT carries the instruction. When a Brazilian oil company settles a contract in Singapore, SWIFT carries the instruction. When you wire money internationally, SWIFT carries the instruction. Over 11,000 financial institutions, more than 200 countries, 42 million messages per day, handling over $5 trillion in transactions every single day. Without SWIFT, international trade as we know it does not function. Think of it as the postal system for the entire global economy. Now imagine one country controls who gets a mailbox. That country is the United States. And in 2022, they proved exactly what that means. SWIFT was founded in 1973. It was designed to be neutral, a cooperative, governed by its member banks, based in Belgium, technically independent. Technically, because SWIFT processes transactions in US dollars and operates under Belgian law, which operates under European law, which, since 2001, has cooperated fully with American financial sanctions. The United States does not own SWIFT, but it does not need to. It owns the dollar, and SWIFT runs on the dollar. The first time Washington used this was Iran. 2012. Iran's banks removed from SWIFT. Its oil exports strangled. Its economy collapsed. Inflation hit 40%. The currency lost 80% of its value. Not one American soldier deployed. Then, North Korea. Then, Venezuela. Then, Belarus. And the message became clear. The United States does not need to invade. It does not need to bomb. It needs only to flip a switch, and your economy ceases to function. Here is the problem. When you show the world your weapon, you give the world a reason to build a shield. February 2022 was supposed to be decisive. Cut Russia from SWIFT. Freeze $300 billion of Russian central bank reserves. Collapse the ruble. Collapse the government. Within 1 week, the ruble lost 50% of its value. Western analysts predicted a complete economic collapse within months. That collapse never came. Here is what happened instead. Russia redirected its energy exports to China, to India, to Turkey, settled in yuan, in rupees, in anything but dollars. India, a US strategic partner, began buying Russian oil at a 30% discount, paying in rupees. Through banks Washington could not control. China accelerated CIPS, its own international payment system, built specifically to route around SWIFT. The ruble recovered. Russian energy revenues hit record highs in 2022 because Europe, despite the sanctions, kept buying Russian gas for 18 months because they had no alternative. But the deeper damage was not to Russia. The deeper damage was to the dollar itself, because every country that was not Russia watched what happened to Russia's $300 billion in reserves, frozen, held hostage, by a country that did not own them. And they asked one question: if it can happen to Russia, why would we keep our reserves in dollars? China had been building its alternative for years, quietly, patiently. The the same way it built its rare earth monopoly. CIPS, the cross-border interbank payment system, launched 2015, designed to do exactly what SWIFT does, but in yuan, and outside American jurisdiction. In 2022, CIPS transaction volume jumped 21%, but CIPS was just the beginning. mBridge, a project involving China, the UAE, Hong Kong, and Thailand. A digital currency payment platform. Government to government. Central bank to central bank. No SWIFT. No dollar. No American oversight. In 2024, mBridge reached minimum viable product stage. The infrastructure exists. It is operational. It is not yet at SWIFT scale, but it does not need to be to matter. Because the point is not to replace SWIFT tomorrow. The point is to prove that replacement is possible. And that proof now exists. Now. Something the Western media barely covered. In late 2025, the European Union announced a formal plan to end its reliance on American financial infrastructure by 2030. The digital euro, a payment system run by the European Central Bank, not by Visa, not by MasterCard, not by SWIFT, not subject to American jurisdiction. Europe, America's closest ally, building an exit. Why? Because after 2022, European governments watched Washington weaponize financial systems against a country that Europe depends on for energy. Watched American pressure force decisions that cost European economies hundreds of billions. Watched the US threaten tariffs against allies as casually as it threatened adversaries. Europe decided, quietly, bureaucratically, deliberately, that depending on American financial infrastructure is a national security risk. Not because Europe opposes America, but because Europe can no longer afford to trust any single point of control that it does not hold. When your closest allies start building the exit, the door is already open. Now, the move that happened 9 hours ago as this script was written, China announced zero-tariff access to more than 50 African nations. Every product, every industry, zero tariff, immediate. This is not generosity, this is architecture. Africa holds 30% of the world's critical minerals: cobalt, manganese, platinum, chromium, the materials that will define the next century of technology and warfare. China is not just offering trade. China is offering an ecosystem. Trade in yuan, payment through CIPS, not SWIFT. Infrastructure loans through the Belt and Road. Mineral extraction deals that bypass Western buyers. By 2030, if China onboards 50 African nations into a closed-loop yuan settlement system, that is an entire continent that no longer needs SWIFT. An entire continent that no longer needs the dollar. Not because they hate America, because China offered something better, and America, consumed with tariffs and threats, was not in the room. Here is the contradiction that no one in Washington wants to say out loud. The dollar's power as a reserve currency depends entirely on trust. Countries hold dollars because they believe those dollars are safe, neutral, not subject to political weaponization. The moment you freeze $300 billion of a sovereign nation's reserves, you have told every other sovereign nation, your reserves are not safe. The moment you use SWIFT as a sanction weapon, you have told every excluded nation, build your own system. And they are building it. Russia, China, India, the Gulf states, Brazil, South Africa, Europe, not a revolution, not overnight, but a slow, deliberate, irreversible shift. The dollar's share of global reserves has fallen from 71% in 2001 to 57% today. In 2 decades, the world's most powerful financial instrument lost 14 percentage points of market share. That is not a trend, that is a verdict. Every time Washington uses the dollar as a weapon, it accelerates that verdict. You cannot be the world's reserve currency, the neutral foundation of global trade, and a weapon pointed at anyone who disagrees with you. You must choose one. America is still pretending it can be both. Connect it now. The petrodollar gave America financial dominance. The Strait of Hormuz gave it leverage over energy. The rare earth monopoly, China took that. The lithium triangle, China moved in. And now, the financial system itself, the final layer of American power, is being quietly dismantled. Not by war, not by collapse, by the countries America drove out. Iran, Russia, China, the global south. Now, Europe, now, Africa. Each one building a small exit. Each exit making the next one easier. No single exit destroys the dollar. But 50 small exits, taken over 20 years, by nations that once had no choice. That is how reserve currencies die. Not with a crash, not with a bang, with a quiet, patient, irreversible decision to leave. The bomb was not dropped on America. America built it, aimed it at the world, and wondered why the world started wearing armor. Now you know. 6 scripts, 6 systems, all pointing at the same thing. Subscribe. This is not theory. This is already happening.